Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Safe inside a home, it was gentle, a rhythm that lulled the soul. But out in the open, it was merciless, cold, soaking, relentless in its slow torment. Theron had always felt both sides of it. Tonight, the storm matched his heart. Every flash of lightning, every roll of thunder set the cadence of his steps, the tempo of his pulse. It was the perfect night to kill. His black robes clung to him, heavy with water, his hood plastered to his hair. Still, his piercing blue eyes never wavered. A subtle shift in the rainfall brushed against his senses, a ripple only he could feel. Another assassin. Theron slid into a narrow alley, his movements as soft as the drizzle itself. The tycoon's estate loomed ahead, vast and ostentatious, guarded tightly. Greed had built it, greed would bury it. And tonight, two hunters stalked its walls. Through the curtain of rain, Theron found him, bronze assassin Lynn. He recognized the man's posture instantly. Theron's mind was an arsenal sharper than any blade. Rule 2 of the Association: an assassin's greatest weapon is not the blade, but the mind. Lynn crept from the west wing, the path of weakest defense. Too obvious, too easy, a trap disguised as an opening. Theron had studied every report, listened to every rumor. He already knew how those before had died. Fool! But then a spark. Lightning crawled over Lynn's robes, rippling in a thin sphere before vanishing into the storm. A detection art. He hadn't found Theron, but he knew something was wrong. Rule 3 of the Association: adaptability is more important than strength. Theron moved first. Steel flashed, cutting through sheets of rain as his short sword lunged forward. The storm itself seemed to guide his hand. Lynn spun, eyes wide, blade screeching against Theron's strike. His free hand flared with golden arcs, a whip of lightning aimed straight for Theron's chest. But water bent to Theron's will. The droplets wrapped around his arm, catching the strike and channeling it harmlessly into the ground. Especially in the rain, lightning was useless against him. His dagger pierced Lynn's chest. Water exploded outward like shrapnel, shredding flesh and organ alike. Lynn's voice broke, eyes wide with rage, fear, and disbelief. Rule 1 of the Association: never kill another assassin. It was a fine rule, but Theron had never cared. The torrential downpour showed no sign of easing. Blood that should have stained the ground was swept away, and to everyone but Theron, so too were the sounds. Kneeling, he pulled aside Lynn's soaked robes, confirming what he already suspected. The strike had told him what the files could not. Lightning Mancy ran in Lynn's blood. That meant only one thing: Silver Assassin Ryden's younger brother. Family ties were rarely acknowledged in the Association. Rules forbade killing, but also nepotism. More often than not, a sibling was a rival, not an ally. Still, confirmation mattered. It told Theron how to prepare for the inevitable. He inventoried the spoils. A cloak, a dagger, around 800 bronzes. The treasures were high quality, but unsellable. Too easy to trace. The coins, at least, were clean. But the payout for this mission dwarfed such scraps tenfold. They were nothing but pocket change. The dagger he would keep for now. Theron rose and moved toward the eastern wing of the estate. His own dagger was forged from common iron. His short sword, however, was a bronze soul relic, a relic from a warmer life he no longer had. A wall of manicured hedges marked the estate's final defense. No stone, no steel, just shrubs trimmed with the arrogance of wealth. From the cover of a tree, Theron watched. Until now, every step had been calculated, every move practiced to perfection. But this step carried uncertainties. No simulation could replace lived blood. That was why Lynn had to die, not for fear of competition, but because no plan could suffer interference. A raindrop struck his hood, the signal he needed. He glided forward, each step so light it bent no blade of grass. The storm became his domain, its every rhythm painting figures in his mind. Each deviation grated against his senses like steel on glass. He vaulted the hedge in a single bound. His blade flashed, the throat opened, and before the body fell he was already gone, shadowed by rain. One slash. One kill. Most of these guards weren't even mansers. True experts were costly, and this target wasn't worth silver-level protection. In silence, Theron culled them. Smooth as mist, sharp as rain rebounding from stone, relentless as a flood. But inevitability came. Two figures moved together. Two options: slip past and risk discovery, or strike before they could speak. He chose the second. Waiting in the shadows, he let the storm guide him. A thread of water coiled, snaring one guard's ankle. He stumbled forward. Theron exploded from concealment. The second bent to help, only to meet the gleam of his dagger. Panicked, he raised an earth-hardened arm. The dagger was a feint. The short sword pierced his chest. Rain detonated inside him, organs shredded by Theron's will. The first guard pushed up to rise, only for his comrade's corpse to collapse against him, pinning him down. Theron's blade stabbed through both bodies at once. He exhaled, scanning the compound. More bronze mansers than expected. Mana's running low, but retreat wasn't an option. He had prepared for over a month, waiting for rain like this. Rain that cloaked him, empowered him, made him untouchable. Failure tonight meant waiting who knew how long for another chance. Theron's eyes narrowed. Theron took deep breaths. Checking his mana reserves, he realized he had no more than 10% left. It's enough. The core of the compound lay below him, and a string of corpses lay behind him. Ahead should be the location of the target. With light steps, Theron slipped ahead. Without the rain, he had to be more cautious with his movements. Any unnecessary sound could alert the enemy. So, using his watermancy, he expelled all the rain from his cloak and clothing, carrying it all in a small orb that floated behind him, silent but deadly. What Theron didn't expect was for the target to be sitting on a plush reclining chair, looking right at him with an amused smile on his face. The target was known as Merchant Greycoat. He was a heavy-set man, much like many others of his profession, but he lacked the bejeweled, blinged-out appearance to match. There wasn't a single speck of wealth on him that wasn't inlaid right into his green and gold robes. You assassins are all so amusing, coming here to die on your own. Don't you know how foolish you are? Merchant Greycoat slowly stood to his feet. There was a rush of wind, and green mist whirled around his body. The man was so relaxed that he was using his windmancy to stand. There is no one on this compound capable of sneaking up on me. You know why I built such a large, hollow hall outside? There's a clear rush of wind that runs across it. With my abilities, could you sneak up on me even if you wanted to? Merchant Greycoat smiled, a sick, self-satisfied smile. Was it giggling his neck, or was it his chin? It was hard to tell. You could die now. The merchant raised a hand, and a rune flashed on his finger. A ring hidden in plain sight manifested and glowed with a green light. The wind around it swirled, and a rotating arrow of wind took shape, exuding a jade color. The skill finished forming instantly, rushing toward Theron in a whirlwind. Theron's expression changed, and he turned to run, the ball of water behind him becoming a shield. A hint of surprise formed on the merchant's face, but not enough to change anything. There was a huge gap between formless mana and one focused with a skill. As expected, the swirling arrow blew the shield of water apart. It lost some of its glow, but it still collided with Theron's back, sending him sprawling out of the window he had come from. A mouthful of blood came from Theron's mouth as he rolled. He rushed to his feet and bolted down the open-air hallway, moving with the greatest speed he could muster. Laughter came from behind him as more rings began to manifest from thin air on Merchant Greycoat's thick fingers. He glided on a current of wind, closing the distance on Theron so fast it seemed he might swallow him whole. Theron twisted back and threw his dagger, startling the merchant. They had been in no man's land during the chase. The merchant wasn't yet close enough for Theron to do something so drastic, but he wasn't far away enough for the fact that the dagger wasn't a flying dagger to matter. A sheen of blue coated the common treasure, and it appeared before the merchant with great speed, taking advantage of the latter's forward momentum. Another ring lit up on the merchant's finger, and a whirlwind of jade wind appeared around him, shattering the dagger. Merchant Greycoat was stunned before he let out a hearty laugh. "You came to assassinate me with mere common weapons? You just might laugh me to my death." Theron didn't respond. Using the short lull of time, he bought himself to reach the end of the hallway and burst out into the rain. The smell had hit him long ago, but the fresh coat of moisture was like a tonic to his veins. He spun around, letting his momentum glide him backward across the soft, wet grass. Locking onto the merchant, he began to gather up the last of his mana, an icy glow pulsing in his irises. Merchant Greycoat suddenly came to a stop at the end of the hall. He looked down at the sputtering line of moist concrete and shook his head with a chuckle. "Do you know why you're especially foolish? I chased after you just for a bit of fun, but if you're asking me to get wet, you're asking for too much. I do not need to kill you personally." The merchant pulled at his sleeve and revealed a bracelet hidden underneath. With a swipe, a signal was launched into the air, ignoring the ceiling entirely. Then, he stood there and waited in the warmth with a smile on his face. Time ticked by, and yet, even after several seconds, nothing came. "Do you know why you're especially foolish?" Theron spoke for the first time. His voice was gentle. It was the kind one would expect from a scholar or professor, not from an assassin. Although it had the deep cadence of a man, it lacked any sort of forcefulness. "You can't even realize you're being led by the nose. Your guards? They're all dead." Theron's short sword slipped into his palm as he accelerated forward. A lance of water mana formed around it, and it seemed to contain everything Theron had left. The merchant was shocked and moved to block, but he remembered too late that he had already used the shield cast on his right hand, and it was already too late to use the one on his left. Theron's short sword drove into his chest, only to be met with substantial resistance. The blade bent into a crescent and could have snapped if it hadn't been a bronze soul treasure. Bang! The merchant's robes exploded, revealing a now damaged inner armor. Its runes flickered, some blinking out entirely. Merchant Greycoat chuckled in his shock. He had forgotten that he wore inner armor. He looked up, ready to bask in Theron's despair, only to find a flash of gold instead. Theron drove Lynn's bronze soul dagger right through the blinking runes of the inner armor. An explosion of lightning cut away the last of Merchant Greycoat's life. The Association. It was the name the assassins who joined it knew it by, but to the outside world, they were known as the Daggers of the Night. They were far from the only assassin guild on the continent, but they did have a firm hold on the province. If one were to name the main centers of power in the Night Province, there was the Night Empire, ruled by the Nightingale family, the Obsidian Eclipse sect, and finally, the Daggers of the Night. Most would not dare to say this aloud. An assassin guild could never be acknowledged as a legitimate power. These undercurrents ruled the province, and it was to this power in the shadows that Theron returned. The Daggers of the Night didn't have just one location. As a power hidden in the shadows, it was scattered across the province, hidden in the crevices of the empire. Before one became a gold assassin, they couldn't truly be considered a member of the organization. This was an odd thing to say, considering goldmancers were the strongest of the Night Province, but in practice, it was functionally true. This was because before reaching that step, rather than being an assassin of the Daggers of the Night, you were instead beholden to a single branch alone, without a chance to interact with the others. Every branch was headed by a gold assassin and had leagues of bronzes and silvers beneath them. Theron's particular branch was located in Thistlebrook City, one of the 10 largest outside the core of the empire. Theron walked into a mercenary guild and paid a fee for a room. After a bite to eat, he made his way up the rickety stairs and into his accommodations. But instead of laying to rest, he walked toward a cracked and graying mirror. Placing his hands on its surface, Theron chanted unintelligible words in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Hidden runes on the back of his hand came to life, and his palm slipped through the mirror surface. Soon, his body disappeared into the mirror. Theron's vision cleared, and he found himself standing in the same position in a more familiar room. He had always found the methods of the daggers of the night fascinating. An organization on this level shouldn't have such methods. It made one wonder. The room was quaint and dark, the walls carved out of gray stone, not much unlike the bed. Other than a pillow and a blanket, there was nothing else of note, and Theron preferred it that way. He left the room and walked down the sparsely lit corridors. These headquarters were almost certainly carved out of mountain somewhere, but just wondering about this was dangerous business. The hallway ended, giving way to a simple round room. There were some tables where a few assassins gathered, but the main attraction was a counter located in a far corner. An old man sat behind it, part dozing off, but it was his existence that kept everyone else in line. Theron's appearance didn't garner much attention. He rarely spent much time in the association, and it had been a month since he took the mission. So many had taken and failed it by now that it no longer held the same weight. A sack was placed down on the counter, and the old man slowly opened his eyes. Others wouldn't remember, but he would. Rather than checking the sack, he gazed into Theron's eyes. An unwavering pair of icy blue gems looked back at him. The old man moved, and the head in the sack was revealed. Rotund rolls of fat spilled over, the dried blood unable to mask it. The Greycoat mission has been completed. The old man rolled a thumb over one of his fingers, and a rune manifested, revealing a silver ring. With a light glow, a card and 3 pristine bottles appeared. No matter how uncaring the surrounding assassins had been prior to this, they all heard these words clearly. Even if the old man hadn't spoken, for a bronze assassin to receive such substantial rewards, it could only be thanks to one mission. Many rose from their seats to get a better look. A young man looked up. His nose was large, and his eyes were narrow. Somehow, his face still felt a bit flat. "What happened?" he asked. He hadn't been paying enough attention earlier and hadn't even noticed Theron walk in. "The Greycoat mission, it's completed." "Oh, Lynn did it." The young man's eyes lit up. "Lynn? No, I don't recognize this guy." The young man was taken aback. He stood to his feet and looked over, and when he saw who it was, he too was shocked. Unlike the others, though, it was because he recognized Theron. The commotion in the room wasn't enough to faze Theron. He expected this to happen. He was only interested in returning to his room and having a night's rest. After so long on the road, he hadn't had a good night's rest in weeks. Though he had some thoughts about how he would digest his gains, now wasn't the time to consider such things. Unfortunately, his path was blocked before he could do so. "It's you." The flat-faced young man stood in Theron's way. Most called this young man Big Nose, though Theron knew his name to be Manson. The two weren't acquainted with one another, so Theron had no idea why his path was being blocked. "How did you do it? Didn't Lynn take this mission? You completed it before him." The more questions Manson asked, the deeper Theron's frown became. "Get out of my way. I'm not familiar with you." Theron spoke coldly, a dangerous light flickering in his eyes. Manson couldn't react as Theron brushed by him, moving down the dimly lit halls. When he recovered, he was livid. "If you think that mission is so easy to complete, you've got another thing coming, arrogant bastard." Theron's steps paused for a moment before he continued walking. For some reason, he didn't believe Manson was lying. Manson's satisfaction only lasted for a moment. His heart skipped a beat the next moment, realizing he had said something he shouldn't have. The satisfaction was short-lived, but the price he might pay for it was steep. He gave a quick glance around and rushed away, hoping that no one would mind what he had said too much. What he didn't expect was to be called for a meeting just a few hours later, and by an even more unexpected person at that. Silver Assassin Raiden sat in a simple wooden chair, his clothing prim and formal, as though preparing to attend a ball. He crossed one leg over the other as Manson walked in, looking up with a calm gaze. The accommodations for silver assassins were beyond that of bronze ones by a good measure, but Manson didn't dare to look around and confirm. The bronze assassin stared right at Raiden's feet, not looking up even once. "I've heard that the Greycoat mission has been completed?" Yes. Manson hurried to nod, almost feeling that he was answering too slowly. "And it's not by bronze assassin Lin." And no, it was another bronze assassin, a newbie, I'm not even sure what his name is. A new recruit? Raiden raised an eyebrow. Even while sharing the same title of Bronze Mancer, not all such assassins were created equal. There were strong divisions and large gaps between them all. The association would only bring those who had yet to cultivate into the fold. It was the only way to weaken the possibility of spies. The largest demographic of new blood came from orphans. The last batch of new recruits was from 4 months ago or so. Assuming even his own speed of progression, this new recruit couldn't possibly have surpassed more than a third resonance. Why yes, Silver Lord. Raiden chuckled at the ridiculous title, but didn't pursue it. How do you know this? New recruit? I don't know him well. I came across him as a new recruit and stole his welcome gift. Manson grit his teeth after explaining this. What he had done was against the rules, and there were punishments for it, but he also didn't dare to lie to a silver assassin. Plus, although he used the word stole, there wasn't much resistance at all. Theron hadn't fought back like the others, and had simply handed the quota of bronzes and pills over without a word. It was such a short interaction that Manson wouldn't have remembered it if not for how odd it was. Most would feel dissatisfaction, unwillingness, at least a hint of anger, but Theron was like an icy well. He had fathomless depths and a frigid core. Even today, he made no attempt at revenge, as though he had truly not cared back then. I see, Raiden nodded. I also heard that you mentioned something you shouldn't have today. Manson froze, his shoulders trembling. He wanted to grip his fists, but fearing that it would be seen as a sign of aggression, his fingers splayed outward instead. It would have been a comical sight, if not for already being drenched in sweat. I wonder, who would you have heard such a thing from? Raiden uncrossed his legs, recrossing them with the other on top. He leaned onto the wooden chair's armrest, staring at Manson like he was looking at a plaything. The answer was clear to them both. That day Lin took the mission, Raiden and Manson had been there. What others didn't know was that Raiden was the one who pushed his younger brother to take the mission. Back when Raiden was a bronze assassin, he had wanted to take this mission as well, but his master refused. When he asked why, he hadn't received an answer. Since then, Raiden had been somewhat obsessed with finding out more about this, so he sent his younger brother, hoping to gain an inkling. He knew how dangerous it would be, especially if Lin somehow succeeded. It was just that he didn't care. Brotherly affection was nowhere near the top of his list of priorities. That glory should have been his, but much like Manson didn't dare to slight him, he didn't dare to ignore his master's words. Now it seemed he might find out what was so special about that mission. It had just happened in unexpected fashion. Where is Lin? Raiden asked. Aye. Manson was so shaken by the earlier threat that he couldn't formulate his words. What made it worse was the fact Raiden didn't even try to hurry him, sitting there and staring with a smiling expression. He still hasn't come back. HM, you may go. Manson scrambled away, feeling like he had just been pardoned. Neither knew just yet that Lin would never return, but Raiden had a suspicion. He was already wondering just who had killed his younger brother. Could he have failed the mission and left an easy path for Theron? Or, Raiden chuckled, if a new recruit was so bold, things might get interesting. Theron had long fallen into the embrace of sleep. The lines of his face looked much gentler now, painting the image of a time long past. The cold sternness was washed away, replaced by the image of a 14-year-old boy with delicate, yet to mature features and a natural state that was both gentle and playful. Unfortunately, even Theron himself didn't know if that version of himself would ever return. His mind was haunted by images of that day, the flashes of lightning and the last moments of his family. He had read many books about the selfishness of humans, but it wasn't until that day that he truly understood the extent of it. To wipe out a family, a clan, a lineage, for no other reason than to further your strength. The most sickening part was that he should have died with them. If he hadn't been so hung up on his stupid books, he would have been there. Then he wouldn't have to suffer this pain alone. Theron, come with us. A little girl pulled on Theron's arm. She was barely a day over 10 years old, but her little hands had surprising strength. A pair of large blue eyes adorned her face along with a button nose and vibrant pink lips that looked like they belonged on a doll. Quite used to his little sister's antics, Theron continued to rock in his chair comfortably. The calming pitter-patter of rain rebounded against the window. This was his favorite spot in the whole house, and it was only made better when it was raining. Though he was a watermancer, he preferred to be on the inside. He felt that rainfall should be observed, not experienced. There was nothing fun about getting his neat robes ruined. Little Bobo was the opposite. Rain scared her, especially when it was storming. But she'd also be the first to stomp her way into the nearest puddle. "All right, don't disturb your brother anymore, little Bobo. You know the imperial exams are coming up soon." A woman who didn't look a day over 20 stepped into the room. Her hair was done up in delicate braids, and if it wasn't for fear of blasphemy, most might call her Empress on instinct when they first saw her. Theron's mother was the only member of their small family without blue eyes, but she carried the same iciness as the rest of them. Well, the rest of them if Theron was excluded. The affinities of Mansurs were hereditary, but nothing was perfect. While his family had been born as Ice Mansurs, Theron had been born a Water Mancer. This wasn't a big deal to a layman, but the gap between the two was exceptional. Ice Mansurs were existences feared no less than Lightning Mansurs or the rare Light and Dark Mansurs. Water Mansurs, however, were lacking in combat power and were mostly auxiliary supports in battle. Theron had never really minded any of this. He didn't like to fight. He much preferred to stay home and read. Becoming a scholar was his dream. He thought it was much easier to change the world with words and reason as opposed to a large fist. Soon, he would become an imperial scholar, the first step toward entering the emperor's imperial court and rising to the status of prime minister. When he wielded that power, he would be able to change the world for the better. Little Bobo pouted, stubbornly climbing into her brother's lap and lying down. A triumphant smile spread across her little face. How would he read now? A deep laugh came from the side. A solid man who had been stoking the flames of their fireplace stood to his feet. He walked over and picked his daughter up, saving his son from the little demon. Their father was no less handsome than their mother was beautiful. His only flaw was the scruffy, slightly graying mustache he sported over his top lip, a feature that garnered no shortage of ridicule from his little girl. "Blah, blah, blah, too itchy." Little Bobo dodged a kiss, scrambling across her father's body like a spry monkey and claiming a new spot on his back. Theron looked up with a smile. Watching his family's antics and listening to the dance of the rain across the window, he felt true peace. The thoughts that consumed him were far too mature for his age. What 13-year-old would be so clear-headed to enjoy such a moment? Maybe if he were 60 years older, it would have made more sense. That was when the image warped. Time lost its meaning, and Theron found himself rushing through the fields. He had already fallen once, his pristine robes covered in blotches of mud. How had this happened? Why had this happened? The festival had taken place on a rainy day, but to a town filled with watermancers, this might as well have been a plus. Everything was perfect, so why was this happening? Peals of lightning stretched across the skies like a net, particularly large bolts weaving in and out almost like dragons bobbing through the heavens. The pang in his heart grew worse and worse. He couldn't hear the screams over the raging thunder, but he could feel their deaths. His senses had always been amplified in the rain. Maybe of everyone present, he was the first to realize that something was wrong, but there was still nothing he could do to change it. Haggard breaths came from his lips, his lungs threatening to tear themselves apart. His throat felt as though the flaming devil was clawing its way up from the pit of his stomach, and his heart hurt so much he almost lost sensation. Finally, he made it over the hill, and what he saw was a scene he would never forget. A man wearing fluttering golden robes stood high in the skies. Bolts of lightning fell one after another, most aimed toward him, but a few stray sparks made their way through. The citizens of their town couldn't withstand even these small wisps. Just being in proximity to them claimed their lives. Theron could see his family below. His father shielded little Bobo and his mother behind him. His little sister had her eyes closed tight, her small arms wrapped around his neck. No, he felt the bolt before it even descended, and the man in the sky's reaction was even clearer. Standing in those fluttering golden robes, The man casually waved a palm and blocked only a portion of it. He could have blocked it all, Theron was certain. He could feel it. Theron's family was burnt to ash in a single strike. He felt his father's final struggle, but it was all for naught. Who could stand against heaven's fury? His gaze went white with grief and rage. Why his family? Why this town? Why here? Who would do this? The words he heard next were forever etched into his soul. Theron lay in bed shirtless. A necklace hung from his neck, taking the shape of an inconspicuous sword. Every time he took a breath, a frosty energy would be sucked into it. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open, a cold sweat forming a thin layer over him. I will let you live. Stoke that hatred. Become the fuel for my karma. Theron sat up on his elbows, his core muscles softening and solidifying beneath his heavy breathing. His delicate skin reddened considerably, a spike of rage twisting his immature features. Every night, the same dream, again and again. It was certainly not natural. It acted as a reminder, a brand on his soul to stoke his hatred. There wouldn't be a moment of peace until one of them died. Mansers were separated into 4 categories: spirit mansers, soul mansers, flux mansers, and elemental mansers. Most were born with a strong affinity for one, though, depending on your starting mancy, it was possible to transition to one of the others with time and effort. The man whose tribulation killed his family and most of his town was a spirit mancer. This path of mancy was most simply defined as the ability to use mana as a proxy to absorb the resultant mana of others. This was the textbook definition, vague and hard to understand for most. Only an imperial scholar like Theron would know it as such. Most others would know it in vague terms. If a layman were asked, they might say it was the rarest mancy that it allowed one to read minds and control the soul, or complete acts of divination. Or, in Theron's experience, it allowed one to absorb bad karma to strengthen themselves. The spirit mancer who killed his family had done so for no other reason than to use their resentment to pass his tribulation smoothly. He let Theron live for no other reason than he believed it might help him with a breakthrough in the future. Theron did not know his name. He didn't know who this person was, if he was close by or far away. He didn't even know what level of strength this person wielded. All he knew was that to enter the Goldmancy level, there was no such tribulation. Either this man was far above Goldmancers, or he practiced a technique that brought down heavenly judgment. Theron hadn't even been a Bronze Mancer back then. He had no way of deciphering that man's strength, but his face was burned into his memory, as were the events of that day. Even if he wanted to forget, he couldn't. Theron pulled himself out of bed. He hadn't slept in the hideout, but had instead chosen to stay in the inn. It was safer here. After washing up, he gathered his things and placed a palm on the mirror. Soon, he was in his association accommodations. The stone bed was cold and hard, but Theron didn't mind. The coolness helped him calm from this morning's events, and after a while of sitting on it in silence, he had adjusted himself enough to pull out his gains. He left the coins to the side and took out the 3 pills. They were the most common pills of improvement, bronze resonance pills. To become a mancer, one needed to form a bronze core. This core would take shape in one's dantian and act as the center of one's accumulation. Resonance pills help to refine and rid one's core of impurities. These, in particular, were of mid-tier quality, making them perfect for Theron's requirements. Ryden wasn't wrong. Theron was indeed at the 3rd resonance. One needed to complete 9 resonances to attempt a breakthrough to Silvermancy. Lynn had been at the 7th resonance, and Merchant Greycoat had been at the 9th. It was just that Theron's strength in the rain was probably a match for anyone beneath Silvermancy. Well, if Merchant Greycoat had some actual combat skill to match his obscene wealth, he could have very well killed Theron. But the man was ultimately a paper tiger who only had his cultivation thanks to said wealth. As one might expect, Theron would use these mid-tier bronze resonance pills to enter the 4th resonance. After a final breath, he swallowed the first pill. His skin began to heat up, reddening beneath the strain. Deep within his body, the medicinal strength of the first pill rushed through his meridians. It split along the winding paths, and suddenly converged on his bronze core all at once. Theron clenched his teeth beneath the strain, a whirlwind of mana forming in his dantian. The force compressed his bronze core again, and then again. It took 3 hours before the effects died down. By then, Theron was drenched. It felt like he had just run a long distance at his fastest pace, his heart taking a long while to settle down. Almost there. He swallowed the second pill. The process repeated itself, but this time Theron withstood it with far greater ease for 2 reasons. First, because this was his second time eating a mid-tier pill, and second, because his meridians had already sufficiently widened. In practice, one wasn't supposed to take a mid-tier resonance pill until the 4th resonance, but Theron was using it to break through instead. Theron should have been using a breakthrough-type pill, but those were far too expensive. A single mid-tier bronze resonance pill easily cost 10,000 bronzes. That was the market price, but it wasn't a surprise to see them go for double. A breakthrough pill of the same caliber would cost 5 times that at worst. In the end, it was all worth it. There was a crack in Theron's bronze core, and its outer layer peeled away like the shell of a boiled egg. Beneath, a brighter bronze was revealed, more resplendent and shimmering than the last. Theron released a turbid breath and slowly opened his eyes. He had succeeded, and in the process, he had even saved a pill. Theron stretched, his bones popping and cracking. There was a new sheen of sweat coating his body, a mixture of dead skin and the impurities from his previous bronze core. The first thing he did was return to his inn room and scrub himself clean. As he did so, he planned out his next steps. He needed a new dagger, but he also needed more mancy methods. If spirit mancers dealt in matters of divination and karma, soul mancers were the beast tamers, alchemists, and blacksmiths of the world. The two were opposite sides of the same coin. Spirit mancers absorbed the mana of others to strengthen themselves, while soul mancers granted their mana to others to strengthen them. Much the same way, flux and elemental mancers were likewise opposites, the latter controlling the external elements to cast techniques, and the former using mana to instead strengthen their bodies directly. Bronze soul items, crafted by soul mancer blacksmiths, were no less expensive than pills. In most cases, they were even more costly. The more Theron thought about it, the more he felt that the rewards for this supposedly impossible mission were far too low. He had thought this before, but it didn't truly make sense to him until he heard Manson's slip of the tongue. If this was truly a mission none were meant to complete, the coins might have been kept artificially low just to ensure no one was tempted to take drastic measures and upset the status quo. But in that case, 2 questions remained. Why put the mission up at all, then? And who had a vested interest in ensuring it never succeeded, even after almost half a decade? On the other hand, did any of that matter when he now had the sum of the merchant's wealth in his hands? Thistlebrook City was one of the 10 largest cities outside the core of the empire. 6 months ago, Theron had come here to complete the Imperial Scholar exams, an event that took place once every 3 years. Every young scholar hopeful was allowed 2 chances to pass, and the test could be taken any time before one's 17th birthday. Having succeeded, Theron's standing in the city was quite high. Peeling off the skin mask, Theron revealed his true face for the first time in over a month. The face staring back at him was youthful, but it already carried a budding handsomeness. His brows sloped gently, and his jaw was slowly sharpening over time. He wasn't particularly tall, standing at just 5 feet 6 inches, but he still had time to grow. Regardless, whether it was his temperament or his posture, both were beyond his years. Theron slipped out of the crowded tavern with no one being any wiser. The flow of traffic was so great that none noticed the young man who had never entered had just exited. Robes of white and violet fluttered around him, the insignia of an imperial scholar hanging from his waist. The emblem appeared to be carved from white stone. At its center, a black bird outlined in gold soared within a wreath of black roses. His long black hair was tied with a ribbon of violet silk that matched his robes in shade and tone. Everywhere he went, he received looks of awe and adulation. To the people of Thistlebrook, seeing an imperial scholar was no different from seeing a celebrity. To the Night Empire, Theron was treated quite well, too. He had received an honorary noble title, not to mention discounts across any Imperial clan-owned establishments. Though this privilege would only last for the duration of his studies, it was a great advantage nonetheless. With his identity, Theron walked into the tallest building in the city. The pagoda seemed to soar into the clouds, though this was mostly an illusion of grandeur. The establishment was known as the Nightingale Pagoda, or rather, it was a branch of it. There were many merchants, merchant guilds, and merchant families in the empire, but there was only one main exchange and trading hub. It was the imperial family's not-so-subtle method of keeping everything in check, but no one minded. It kept all the prices regulated, and the competition was good for consumers. The downside was that breaking into the market as a new merchant was almost impossible. And on Theron's side of things, there was no black market for him to take advantage of. "Hello, young scholar. How might I help you today?" An attractive, middle-aged woman greeted Theron with a bow. Although he had walked in with a sea of people, she easily picked him out of the crowd, giving him the treatment due to an imperial scholar. Theron smiled politely. "I would like to buy a weapon. A dagger, preferably. Low-tier bronze soul. I would also like to take a look at some of your techniques. Low-tier as well. I am a watermancer." The woman's eyes lit up. "Yes, of course. Please follow me, young master." Her voice trailed off. Theron, she continued quickly. "You can call me Stara. I'll prepare a catalog for you immediately. Please follow me." Theron was escorted away beneath the envious gazes of many and led to a private room. Soon, a personally curated catalog was placed right before him. As expected of the Nightingale Pagoda, their selection was not small. Considering his requirements were only for the low tier, it wasn't surprising that the choices were so deep. There were more than 300 watermancy daggers to choose from. Techniques were rarer, but even then, there were almost 100. Most are redundant. Of the selection of daggers, the majority were mass-produced goods with only small variations between them. As for the techniques, they were similar in that they mostly performed the same actions. The price of the daggers ranged from around 3,000 to 7,000 bronzes. As for the techniques, they were more expensive, going up to about double the upper end. Theron quickly made his choices. Stara rushed in as though gliding on a cloud, handing Theron a sleek white box. Inside, there was a dagger with a 7-inch curved blade. The cool edge radiated a touch of blue light, and the handle was a dense black that contrasted well. Theron picked up the dagger and balanced it in his palm. He resisted the urge to use any knife skills, cognizant of the fact that he was an imperial scholar right now, not an assassin. "Good blade," he commented perfunctorily. In reality, it was a bit worse than his short sword. But he had yet to see a low-tier bronze soul weapon that matched up to his short sword. For the cost of 6,300 bronzes, it was good enough. Stara beamed, seeing that Theron was happy. She brought in the 3 techniques he had exchanged for soon after. There was a clear vision in Theron's mind. He had only just started on the path of cultivation, but his mind had been filled with books on military strategy. The path of the imperial scholar was actually twofold. There was the military intelligence path and the imperial court path. Theron had reluctantly studied the military path in the past only because the exams covered both aspects, not expecting it to come in handy. Compared to most, he was much sharper in the art of combat and how to secure victory. As such, his techniques of choice fell into 3 categories. First, defense. Second, ranged assault. And third, movement. The defensive technique he chose was the most powerful of the 3. Watermancy wasn't good at attack or speed and agility, but it was excellent in defense. Bursting water shield. This method was an oddly technical one. It had 4 stages of mastery like all techniques did, each one allowing for an elevated level of control. At the entry boundary, blocking was the greatest result one could expect. It functioned exactly like other shield skills, though the potential was far more limited than those formed by Earthmancers, for example. Upon transcending to the proficient boundary, it was possible to trap and contain attacks, redirecting them under the right circumstances or slowing down attacks too powerful for the technique to stop outright to allow the opportunity to dodge. Beyond was the adept boundary. This was the stage where one gained access to the moniker of the technique, burst. Burst was an added layer of complexity, allowing the user of the water shield to deconstruct and self-destruct the technique in a controlled fashion. Used at the right time, it could dispel an attack of great strength, redirecting it into several smaller portions. A step beyond this was the consummate boundary, but it represented something deeper than just an added ability or usage type. Water Bullet. This was the ranged spell Theron chose. They were slower than wind bullets and less penetrating, but they couldn't be ignored either. With each added stage of mastery, one could control more bullets with greater dexterity. Finally, there was Touch of Mirage. Once again, Watermancers were not well known for their speed, but their auxiliary abilities were still quite good. Touch of Mirage allowed Theron to convert his water mana into mist to disrupt his enemy's senses and add mystery to his movements. At the entry boundary, this wasn't too obvious, but at the adept boundary, he could even create semi-realistic clones of himself from a mist. The sum total was over 45,000 bronzes. Theron paid this price without a hint of a frown before bidding Star farewell. This money had, of course, come from Merchant Greycoat. In truth, between all the bank cards and promissory notes, let alone bronzes, the fat merchant had a wealth nearing 100,000 silvers. For context, a single silver was worth 100 bronzes. Even further, all of this wealth was just what Theron could scrounge up from physical cash alone. If he were to sell the merchant's treasures and other assets, this wealth would easily triple. But he couldn't. Spending this much was already pushing it. No one would blink because he was an imperial scholar, but it was already odd that a 14-year-old with access to this much wealth would need to buy techniques through such a channel. Shouldn't they be provided by his family? This didn't mention the fact he had yet to look into the mystery of what was so special about the merchant. He didn't have time to go through all of Greycoat's belongings because it was only a matter of time before the signal flare he had sparked attracted others to the estate. Theron walked out of the private room, the embroidered box that carried his dagger resting under an arm. The memory jades that held the techniques were already slotted away into a pouch on his waist. He had long since memorized them, but kept them safe nonetheless. Theron. A sweet voice drifted to Theron's ears. Looking up, he found a group of 5, 3 women and 2 men, walking toward the private rooms together. Theron always did his homework, so he knew who these people were. 2 of them wore Imperial Scholar uniforms, including the young girl who had just spoken. The other 3, however, wore uniforms that were quite eye-catching. The uniforms of the young Imperial Scholars were white and violet, while the true nobles, those who graduated and went on to take up official positions in the army or government, wore black and violet. These 3 youths, though, wore black and gold. They were facing Theron, so he couldn't see their backs, but he was sure that if they turned around, he would see a golden moon on their backs as well. The Obsidian Eclipse sect was the most powerful in the Empire, but that didn't mean it was the only one. These youths were from the Luminescent Moon sect, a powerhouse in the region. In fact, they held more influence than the Marquis Mansion. The young girl's eyes lit up when she confirmed that it was Theron, running up with a happy smile. The young girl was maybe 12 or 13 years old. Her cheeks puffed out in an adorable sort of way, and her red hair was done up in a pair of pigtails. Freckles dotted her cheeks and little nose, a pair of bright green eyes standing out in contrast. Theron couldn't help but smile when he saw this little girl. She probably wasn't a breath above 5 feet, but she seemed larger. It was impossible to believe that she knew any bad or evil existed in the world at all. Theron, where'd you go? You just up and disappeared. Teacher Fern is very unhappy. Just handling something, Theron replied, his voice soft and gentle. Classes were not mandatory. The structure of the Imperial Scholar's path was quite lax. Exams were taken when the student was ready, not at a set time, and so long as you were completing a certain number of credits within an allotted time, you wouldn't be bothered. There were some geniuses, groomed by powerful families, that only entered the academy for a few months, clearing the credit threshold quickly before graduating to jobs long prepared for them. Theron was already on schedule, so it wasn't a problem even if he disappeared for another half year. That's what you always say. What could you possibly have to do? Teacher Fern is worried about you. The little girl seemed to realize that there were others around and blushed. Her gaze darted about, her instinct being to hide behind Theron, but that would only make it worse. Among the girls that had followed her, one who looked to be 16 or 17 years old smiled at Theron. She wore the robes of a luminescent moon sect disciple. Little Sadie, who's this? This is Theron. He is in my class, Sadie recovered and explained. Theron, this is Thessa. She's from the luminescent moon sect. She's my brother's. Just Thessa is fine, she said with a chuckle. Sadie blinked and then turned to everyone else. This is Soren and Tegan. Then there's Flora, who you already know. Soren and Tegan were the two boys of the group. They were both around Thessa's age and from the sect. Flora was a girl from another class under Teacher Bloom, if Theron recalled correctly. He greeted them all with grace. All of his mannerisms seemed to come from an etiquette teacher's dream. There was nothing to pick at. Then I'll have to bid you all farewell, Theron said after some small talk. He had training to do and couldn't waste time here. If you're all around in the future, I'm sure we'll have more time to get better acquainted. Soren smiled, giving Theron a jovial pat on the shoulder. He was a bit handsy, but that also seemed to be his personality, so Theron didn't mind it too much. Of course, we'll be around for a mission the next couple of weeks. Since little Sadie likes you so much, have dinner with us sometime. A not-so-subtle stomp to the foot made Soren wince, and the others laughed at his expense. Theron bowed once more and slipped away. A gaze watched his back vanish into the crowd, a curious light in its depths. Nice kid, Soren chuckled, earning himself another stomp. Theron frowned long after he left the pagoda. He walked with a brisk pace, heading toward the academy, but his thoughts were on the group he had just met. Namely, the three from the luminescent moon sect. Disciples taking missions wasn't out of the norm, but what mission allowed them to come into the city? Most sect missions would be related to training, killing beasts, finding herbs in dangerous locales, etc. But Soren said they would be in the city for 2 weeks? Why did it sound like they had come more for leisure than anything else? The sect was a place to grow warriors. Most weren't even allowed to leave without special cause. Why would they allow a group of 3 to meander about in the city for several weeks? What mission could be so lax? The Imperial Scholar Academy wasn't as grand as the pagoda. The gates were simple and unadorned, a rolling pair of large wooden doors that emitted a delicate floral scent. Inside, the rest of the academy was much the same. The principles of a scholar, whether on the path of imperial politics or military, were rife with reminders of humility and modesty. I will have to take them up on their offer of dinner and monitor this situation. This was the conclusion Theron came to before he suddenly smiled bitterly. A familiar and sharp fragrance filled his nose, and he saw the person before he laid eyes on them. Safe inside a home, it was gentle, a rhythm that lulled the soul. But out in the open, it was merciless, cold, soaking, relentless in its slow torment. Theron had always felt both sides of it. Tonight, the storm matched his heart. Every flash of lightning, every roll of thunder set the cadence of his steps, the tempo of his pulse. It was the perfect night to kill. His black robes clung to him, heavy with water, his hood plastered to his hair. Still, his piercing blue eyes never wavered. A subtle shift in the rainfall brushed against his senses, a ripple only he could feel. Another assassin. Theron slid into a narrow alley, his movements as soft as the drizzle itself. The tycoon's estate loomed ahead, vast and ostentatious, guarded tightly. Greed had built it, greed would bury it. And tonight, 2 hunters stalked its walls. Through the curtain of rain, Theron found him, bronze assassin Lin. He recognized the man's posture instantly. Theron's mind was an arsenal sharper than any blade. Rule 2 of the Association: an assassin's greatest weapon is not the blade, but the mind. Lin crept from the west wing, the path of weakest defense. Too obvious, too easy, a trap disguised as an opening. Theron had studied every report, listened to every rumor. He already knew how those before had died. Fool! But then a spark. Lightning crawled over Lin's robes, rippling in a thin sphere before vanishing into the storm. A detection art. He hadn't found Theron, but he knew something was wrong. Rule 3 of the association: adaptability is more important than strength. Theron moved first. Steel flashed, cutting through sheets of rain as his short sword lunged forward. The storm itself seemed to guide his hand. Lynn spun, eyes wide, blade screeching against Theron's strike. His free hand flared with golden arcs, a whip of lightning aimed straight for Theron's chest. But water bent to Theron's will. The droplets wrapped around his arm, catching the strike and channeling it harmlessly into the ground. Especially in the rain, lightning was useless against him. His dagger pierced Lynn's chest. Water exploded outward like shrapnel, shredding flesh and organ alike. Ew! Lynn's voice broke, eyes wide with rage, fear, and disbelief. Rule 1 of the association: never kill another assassin. It was a fine rule, but Theron had never cared. The torrential downpour showed no sign of easing. Blood that should have stained the ground was swept away, and to everyone but Theron, so too were the sounds. Kneeling, he pulled aside Lynn's soaked robes, confirming what he already suspected. The strike had told him what the files could not. Lightning Mancy ran in Lynn's blood. That meant only one thing: Silver Assassin Raiden's younger brother. Family ties were rarely acknowledged in the association. Rules forbade killing, but also nepotism. More often than not, a sibling was a rival, not an ally. Still, confirmation mattered. It told Theron how to prepare for the inevitable. He inventoried the spoils. A cloak, a dagger, around 800 bronzes. The treasures were high quality, but unsellable. Too easy to trace. The coins, at least, were clean. But the payout for this mission dwarfed such scraps tenfold. They were nothing but pocket change. The dagger he would keep for now. Theron rose and moved toward the eastern wing of the estate. His own dagger was forged from common iron. His short sword, however, was a bronze soul relic, a relic from a warmer life he no longer had. A wall of manicured hedges marked the estate's final defense. No stone, no steel, just shrubs trimmed with the arrogance of wealth. From the cover of a tree, Theron watched. Until now, every step had been calculated, every move practiced to perfection. But this step carried uncertainties. No simulation could replace lived blood. That was why Lynn had to die, not for fear of competition, but because no plan could suffer interference. A raindrop struck his hood, the signal he needed. He glided forward, each step so light it bent no blade of grass. The storm became his domain, its every rhythm painting figures in his mind. Each deviation grated against his senses like steel on glass. He vaulted the hedge in a single bound. His blade flashed, the throat opened, and before the body fell he was already gone, shadowed by rain. One slash, one kill. Most of these guards weren't even mansers. True experts were costly, and this target wasn't worth silver-level protection. In silence, Theron culled them. Smooth as mist, sharp as rain rebounding from stone, relentless as a flood. But inevitability came. Two figures moved together. Two options: slip past and risk discovery, or strike before they could speak. He chose the second. Waiting in the shadows, he let the storm guide him. A thread of water coiled, snaring one guard's ankle. He stumbled forward. Theron exploded from concealment. The second bent to help, only to meet the gleam of his dagger. Panicked, he raised an earth-hardened arm. The dagger was a feint. The short sword pierced his chest. Rain detonated inside him, organs shredded by Theron's will. The first guard pushed up to rise, only for his comrade's corpse to collapse against him, pinning him down. Theron's blade stabbed through both bodies at once. He exhaled, scanning the compound. More bronze mansers than expected. Mana's running low, but retreat wasn't an option. He had prepared for over a month, waiting for rain like this. Rain that cloaked him, empowered him, made him untouchable. Failure tonight meant waiting who knew how long for another chance. Theron's eyes narrowed. Theron took deep breaths. Checking his mana reserves, he realized he had no more than 10% left. It's enough. The core of the compound lay below him, and a string of corpses lay behind him. Ahead should be the location of the target. With light steps, Theron slipped ahead. Without the rain, he had to be more cautious with his movements. Any unnecessary sound could alert the enemy. So, using his watermancy, he expelled all the rain from his cloak and clothing, carrying it all in a small orb that floated behind him, silent but deadly. What Theron didn't expect was for the target to be sitting on a plush reclining chair, looking right at him with an amused smile on his face. The target was known as Merchant Greycoat. He was a heavy-set man, much like many others of his profession, but he lacked the bejeweled, blinged-out appearance to match. There wasn't a single speck of wealth on him that wasn't inlaid right into his green and gold robes. You assassins are all so amusing, coming here to die on your own. Don't you know how foolish you are? Merchant Greycoat slowly stood to his feet. There was a rush of wind, and green mist whirled around his body. The man was so relaxed that he was using his windmancy to stand. There is no one on this compound capable of sneaking up on me. You know why I built such a large, hollow hall outside? There's a clear rush of wind that runs across it. With my abilities, could you sneak up on me even if you wanted to? Merchant Greycoat smiled, a sick, self-satisfied smile. Was it giggling his neck, or was it his chin? It was hard to tell. You could die now. The merchant raised a hand, and a rune flashed on his finger. A ring hidden in plain sight manifested and glowed with a green light. The wind around it swirled, and a rotating arrow of wind took shape, exuding a jade color. The skill finished forming instantly, rushing toward Theron in a whirlwind. Safe inside a home, it was gentle, a rhythm that lulled the soul. But out in the open, it was merciless, cold, soaking, relentless in its slow torment. Theron had always felt both sides of it. Tonight, the storm matched his heart. Every flash of lightning, every roll of thunder set the cadence of his steps, the tempo of his pulse. It was the perfect night to kill. His black robes clung to him, heavy with water, his hood plastered to his hair. Still, his piercing blue eyes never wavered. A subtle shift in the rainfall brushed against his senses, a ripple only he could feel. Another assassin. Theron slid into a narrow alley, his movements as soft as the drizzle itself. The tycoon's estate loomed ahead, vast and ostentatious, guarded tightly. Greed had built it, greed would bury it. And tonight, 2 hunters stalked its walls. Through the curtain of rain, Theron found him, bronze assassin Lin. He recognized the man's posture instantly. Theron's mind was an arsenal sharper than any blade. Rule 2 of the Association. An assassin's greatest weapon is not the blade, but the mind. Lin crept from the west wing, the path of weakest defense. Too obvious. Too easy. A trap disguised as an opening. Theron had studied every report, listened to every rumor. He already knew how those before had died. Fool. But then a spark. Lightning crawled over Lin's robes, rippling in a thin sphere before vanishing into the storm. A detection art. He hadn't found Theron, but he knew something was wrong. Rule 3 of the Association. Adaptability is more important than strength. Theron moved first. Steel flashed, cutting through sheets of rain as his short sword lunged forward. The storm itself seemed to guide his hand. Lin spun, eyes wide, blade screeching against Theron's strike. His free hand flared with golden arcs, a whip of lightning aimed straight for Theron's chest. But water bent to Theron's will. The droplets wrapped around his arm, catching the strike and channeling it harmlessly into the ground. Especially in the rain, lightning was useless against him. His dagger pierced Lin's chest. Water exploded outward like shrapnel, shredding flesh and organ alike. Ew. Lin's voice broke, eyes wide with rage, fear, and disbelief. Rule 1 of the Association. Never kill another assassin. It was a fine rule, but Theron had never cared. The torrential downpour showed no sign of easing. Blood that should have stained the ground was swept away, and to everyone but Theron, so too were the sounds. Kneeling, he pulled aside Lin's soaked robes, confirming what he already suspected. The strike had told him what the files could not. Lightning Mancy ran in Lin's blood. That meant only one thing. Silver Assassin Raiden's younger brother. Family ties were rarely acknowledged in the association. Rules forbade killing, but also nepotism. More often than not, a sibling was a rival, not an ally. Still, confirmation mattered. It told Theron how to prepare for the inevitable. He inventoried the spoils. A cloak, a dagger, around 800 bronzes. The treasures were high quality, but unsellable. Too easy to trace. The coins, at least, were clean. But the payout for this mission dwarfed such scraps tenfold. They were nothing but pocket change. The dagger he would keep for now. Theron rose and moved toward the eastern wing of the estate. His own dagger was forged from common iron. His short sword, however, was a bronze soul relic, a relic from a warmer life he no longer had. A wall of manicured hedges marked the estate's final defense. No stone, no steel, just shrubs trimmed with the arrogance of wealth. From the cover of a tree, Theron watched. Until now, every step had been calculated, every move practiced to perfection. But this step carried uncertainties. No simulation could replace lived blood. That was why Lin had to die, not for fear of competition, but because no plan could suffer interference. A raindrop struck his hood, the signal he needed. He glided forward, each step so light it bent no blade of grass. The storm became his domain, its every rhythm painting figures in his mind. Each deviation grated against his senses like steel on glass. He vaulted the hedge in a single bound. His blade flashed, the throat opened, and before the body fell he was already gone, shadowed by rain. One slash, one kill. Most of these guards weren't even mansers. True experts were costly, and this target wasn't worth silver-level protection. In silence, Theron culled them. Smooth as mist, sharp as rain rebounding from stone, relentless as a flood. But inevitability came. Two figures moved together. Two options: slip past and risk discovery, or strike before they could speak. He chose the second. Waiting in the shadows, he let the storm guide him. A thread of water coiled, snaring one guard's ankle. He stumbled forward. Theron exploded from concealment. The second bent to help, only to meet the gleam of his dagger. Panicked, he raised an earth-hardened arm. The dagger was a feint. The short sword pierced his chest. Rain detonated inside him, organs shredded by Theron's will. The first guard pushed up to rise, only for his comrade's corpse to collapse against him, pinning him down. Theron's blade stabbed through both bodies at once. He exhaled, scanning the compound. More bronze mansers than expected. Mana's running low. But retreat wasn't an option. He had prepared for over a month, waiting for rain like this. Rain that cloaked him, empowered him, made him untouchable. Failure tonight meant waiting who knew how long for another chance. Theron's eyes narrowed. Theron took deep breaths. Checking his mana reserves, he realized he had no more than 10% left. It's enough. The core of the compound lay below him, and a string of corpses lay behind him. Ahead should be the location of the target. With light steps, Theron slipped ahead. Without the rain, he had to be more cautious with his movements. Any unnecessary sound could alert the enemy. So, using his watermancy, he expelled all the rain from his cloak and clothing, carrying it all in a small orb that floated behind him, silent but deadly. What Theron didn't expect was for the target to be sitting on a plush reclining chair, looking right at him with an amused smile on his face. The target was known as Merchant Greycoat. He was a heavy-set man, much like many others of his profession, but he lacked the bejeweled, blinged-out appearance to match. There wasn't a single speck of wealth on him that wasn't inlaid right into his green and gold robes. You assassins are all so amusing, coming here to die on your own. Don't you know how foolish you are? Merchant Greycoat slowly stood to his feet. There was a rush of wind, and green mist whirled around his body. The man was so relaxed that he was using his windmancy to stand. There is no one on this compound capable of sneaking up on me. You know why I built such a large hollow hall outside. There's a clear rush of wind that runs across it. With my abilities, could you sneak up on me even if you wanted to? Merchant Greycoat smiled, a sick, self-satisfied smile. Was it giggling his neck, or was it his chin? It was hard to tell. You could die now. The merchant raised a hand, and a rune flashed on his finger. A ring hidden in plain sight manifested and glowed with a green light. The wind around it swirled, and a rotating arrow of wind took shape, exuding a jade color. The skill finished forming instantly, rushing toward Theron in a whirlwind. By the time many of the seats were filled, Theron stood behind a wide podium with Malaya, waiting for their opponents to arrive. Malaya was a frail girl. Her build was slender, and her face was lovable. Hints of her baby fat were fading away to reveal the visage of a woman, and she was most definitely a favorite of the students. Although she wasn't a femme fatale, she had a gentle air to her. One would be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't have a fond expression of her. She fidgeted on the podium, arranging the blank pieces of paper and lining up her pens and pencils. Nothing could seem to soothe her OCD, so she shifted them again and again. After a polite greeting, the two partners hadn't spoken again. The exchange was meant to simulate a high-pressure situation where you might have to work with someone you weren't familiar with. Plus, the added variability of unknown questions raised the stakes. There was a slight commotion at the doors, and a new wave of students entered, led by a short old lady. She moved with vigor, although she leaned on a cane that looked carved from an ancient tree. Behind her, there were two prominent youths. Soraya Thistle, another 18-year-old third year. She had accumulated 49 credits and was well on her way to becoming an honors graduate. Benedict Gray, an earldom descendant. He had accumulated 57 credits and was in his third year. The closer one got to the top, the larger the gap that even a single credit represented. That was also why Theron's 12 credits stood out so fiercely. Teacher Bloom surprisingly didn't react with much surprise to seeing Theron on the stage. She sent her students up and took a seat, readying herself for the coming event. Murmurs and whispers soon consumed the exchange court. There were 3 18-year-olds on the stage and one 14-year-old that stood out like a sore thumb. Theron stood with his eyes closed. If I perform poorly, it will justify their reactions and potentially increase the ire they feel for me. If I perform well, they'll understand Teacher Fern's intentions, but the resentment will still remain. It's a dead end no matter what. He had lived a quiet life in the academy thus far. If not for wanting to leave for an extended period of time, he wouldn't have completed his credits so quickly, nor caught Teacher Fern's attention. Though the valiant housewife thought she was guiding him, in reality, she was making his life worse. It wasn't just about the inconvenience of living in the limelight. Orphans like him didn't have the luxury of offending nobles, and that was exactly the fire Teacher Fern had just pushed him into. Her kindness was a detriment, and her naivete, her unconscious trust that the system would allow Theron to shine, would bring him no shortage of trouble. Despite the calm look on his face right now, Theron was more than a little displeased, but what could he do? Theron's eyes opened as a silhouette appeared at the center of the debate platform. The figure appeared in a wisp and, without a word, a gentle smile on his face. The man would be a breath of light, if such a thing made sense. His hair and beard were far too bright a shade of white to feel natural, and his skin was bronzed in vibrancy. This was the dean of the political stream, Dean Gray. Welcome, everyone. I won't waste your time with a long, drawn-out speech. Just remember to use this exchange to build your knowledge and your camaraderie. Dean Gray raised a hand, and a fluttering ball of light appeared in his palm. It rose to the ceiling and exploded in a firework, forming a line of words in what could only be described as an impeccable display of mana control. Mana is life. Mana is power. These two philosophies have ruled the discourse for generations. Team Bloom will take the former, and Team Fern the latter. You have 10 minutes to prepare before the opening round begins. Malaya had already begun to write furiously, dashing through ideas. She planned to give herself 5 minutes, then spend the next 5 minutes organizing their argument with Theron. Theron gazed at the question for a moment before he looked to where Dean Gray had vanished. Then his gaze swept over the crowd. 5 minutes passed quickly, and Malaya looked down at Theron's papers with a frown. Why were they blank? Was he not preparing? Every roll of thunder set the cadence of his steps, the tempo of his pulse. It was the perfect night to kill. His black robes clung to him, heavy with water, his hood plastered to his hair. Still, his piercing blue eyes never wavered. A subtle shift in the rainfall brushed against his senses, a ripple only he could feel. Another assassin. Theron slid into a narrow alley, his movements as soft as the drizzle itself. The tycoon's estate loomed ahead, vast and ostentatious, guarded tightly. Greed had built it, greed would bury it. And tonight, 2 hunters stalked its walls. Through the curtain of rain, Theron found him, bronze assassin Lin. He recognized the man's posture instantly. Theron's mind was an arsenal sharper than any blade. Rule 2 of the association: an assassin's greatest weapon is not the blade, but the mind. Lin crept from the west wing, the path of weakest defense. Too obvious, too easy, a trap disguised as an opening. Theron had studied every report, listened to every rumor. He already knew how those before had died. Fool! But then a spark. Lightning crawled over Lin's robes, rippling in a thin sphere before vanishing into the storm. A detection art. He hadn't found Theron, but he knew something was wrong. Rule 3 of the association: adaptability is more important than strength. Theron moved first. Steel flashed, cutting through sheets of rain as his short sword lunged forward. The storm itself seemed to guide his hand. Lin spun, eyes wide, blade screeching against Theron's strike. His free hand flared with golden arcs, a whip of lightning aimed straight for Theron's chest. But water bent to Theron's will. The droplets wrapped around his arm, catching the strike and channeling it harmlessly into the ground. Especially in the rain, lightning was useless against him. His dagger pierced Lin's chest. Water exploded outward like shrapnel, shredding flesh and organ alike. Lin's voice broke, eyes wide with rage, fear, and disbelief. Rule 1 of the association: never kill another assassin. It was a fine rule, but Theron had never cared. The torrential downpour showed no sign of easing. Blood that should have stained the ground was swept away, and to everyone but Theron, so too were the sounds. Kneeling, he pulled aside Lin's soaked robes, confirming what he already suspected. The strike had told him what the files could not. Lightning Mancy ran in Lin's blood. That meant only one thing: Silver Assassin Raiden's younger brother. Family ties were rarely acknowledged in the association. Rules forbade killing, but also nepotism. More often than not, a sibling was a rival, not an ally. Still, confirmation mattered. It told Theron how to prepare for the inevitable. He inventoried the spoils. A cloak, a dagger, around 800 bronzes. The treasures were high quality, but unsellable. Too easy to trace. The coins, at least, were clean. But the payout for this mission dwarfed such scraps tenfold. They were nothing but pocket change. The dagger he would keep for now. Theron rose and moved toward the eastern wing of the estate. His own dagger was forged from common iron. His short sword, however, was a bronze soul relic, a relic from a warmer life he no longer had. A wall of manicured hedges marked the estate's final defense. No stone, no steel. Just shrubs, trimmed with the arrogance of wealth. From the cover of a tree, Theron watched. Until now, every step had been calculated, every move practiced to perfection. But this step carried uncertainties. No simulation could replace lived blood. That was why Lin had to die. Not for fear of competition, but because no plan could suffer interference. A raindrop struck his hood, the signal he needed. He glided forward, each step so light it bent no blade of grass. The storm became his domain, its every rhythm painting figures in his mind. Each deviation grated against his senses like steel on glass. He vaulted the hedge in a single bound. His blade flashed. A throat opened, and before the body fell he was already gone, shadowed by rain. One slash. One kill. Most of these guards weren't even mancers. True experts were costly, and this target wasn't worth silver-level protection. In silence, Theron culled them. Smooth as mist, sharp as rain rebounding from stone, relentless as a flood. But inevitability came. Two figures moved together. Two options: slip past and risk discovery, or strike before they could speak. He chose the second. Waiting in the shadows, he let the storm guide him. A thread of water coiled, snaring one guard's ankle. He stumbled forward. Theron exploded from concealment. The second bent to help, only to meet the gleam of his dagger. Panicked, he raised an earth-hardened arm. The dagger was a feint. The short sword pierced his chest. Rain detonated inside him, organs shredded by Theron's will. The first guard pushed up to rise, only for his comrade's corpse to collapse against him, pinning him down. Theron's blade stabbed through both bodies at once. He exhaled, scanning the compound. More bronze mancers than expected. Mana's running low. But retreat wasn't an option. He had prepared for over a month, waiting for rain like this. Rain that cloaked him, empowered him, made him untouchable. Failure tonight meant waiting who knew how long for another chance. Theron's eyes narrowed. Theron took deep breaths. Checking his mana reserves, he realized he had no more than 10% left. It's enough. The core of the compound lay below him, and a string of corpses lay behind him. Ahead should be the location of the target. With light steps, Theron slipped ahead. Without the rain, he had to be more cautious with his movements. Any unnecessary sound could alert the enemy. So, using his watermancy, he expelled all the rain from his cloak and clothing, carrying it all in a small orb that floated behind him, silent but deadly. What Theron didn't expect was for the target to be sitting on a plush reclining chair, looking right at him with an amused smile on his face. The target was known as Merchant Greycoat. He was a heavy-set man, much like many others of his profession, but he lacked the bejeweled, blinged-out appearance to match. There wasn't a single speck of wealth on him that wasn't inlaid right into his green and gold robes. You assassins are all so amusing, coming here to die on your own. Don't you know how foolish you are? Merchant Greycoat slowly stood to his feet. There was a rush of wind, and green mist whirled around his body. The man was so relaxed that he was using his windmancy to stand. There's no one on this compound capable of sneaking up on me. You know why I built such a large, hollow hall outside? There's a clear rush of wind that runs across it. With my abilities, could you sneak up on me even if you wanted to? Merchant Greycoat smiled. A sick, self-satisfied smile. Was it giggling his neck? Or was it his chin? It was hard to tell. You can die now. The merchant raised a hand, and a rune flashed on his finger. A ring hidden in plain sight manifested and glowed with a green light. The wind around it swirled, and a rotating arrow of wind took shape, exuding a jade color. The skill finished forming instantly, rushing toward Theron in a whirlwind. Teacher Fern was quite nervous when she saw Theron's nonchalance. Her original assumption was that even if he threw a tantrum the first time around, he wouldn't continue to do so in the face of real credits, not to mention the dean. But this performance left her shell-shocked. Thinking back, did she truly know this student that well? He had been under her care for half a year and had spent at least 2 of those months away. He was quiet and never responded much to anything, always taking the path of least resistance. Rebelliousness wasn't the word she would use to describe Theron, but now she wasn't so sure. The Thistle Clan young man of Teacher Fern's class had been observing Theron from the start. The bad taste in Sawyer's mouth only grew. He was the only Thistle of Teacher Fern's class who would still participate in this, but he was nowhere near being picked. At his pace, reaching 33 credits was his limit, and it would take all 2 years he had left to accomplish it. Seeing Theron down there only stoked his inferiority complex, and he couldn't help but grip his fists. "Theron," Malaya whispered to him in a hiss. "Yes." Theron replied in a gentle cadence. "We don't have much time left. Do you have anything to add? Look at my notes." Theron sent a glance over. "It's fine." Malaya was taken aback. not sure how to react. What did he mean by that? Time is up. Team Bloom, you will begin. Dean Gray's voice echoed. Soraya cleared her throat and began. I thought that I should first begin with a definition. Mana is life is a popular phrase amongst Mansurs, but life encompasses far too many things, whereas power can only be defined in a fixed lane. I believe this alone is clear enough to make the correct choice obvious, but I will continue nonetheless. Life can refer to raw biology, the configuration of elements that allow a plant to grow and a human to breathe. It can be founded on a more philosophical basis, referring to morality, the meaning of life itself, the standards one sets for themselves. It can refer even to something far more abstract, hinting at the impetus of creation itself. We would argue today that only one word could possibly encompass the true meaning of mana. She gave the crowd a smile as she finished. Malaya was in a state of panic. She had spent too much time trying to catch Theron's attention and not enough consolidating her ideas. What she didn't expect was that Theron would speak without her input. A definition is a good place to start, he began in a gentle voice. But what we define is more important. The definitions of life and power are less important than the definition of mana. Many frowned when they heard these words. Wasn't the point of life and power to act as definitions? Wasn't this circular logic? What was the point in trying to define mana if they were precisely trying to define that in the first place? Malaya almost fainted. It was inappropriate to interrupt or inject her opinion here. Refuting her partner would only make the situation worse. But that didn't stop her from feeling like an ant in a frying pan. Mana exists in two states. There is mana all around us, and there is mana in ourselves. The reason no one has decided on which definition is true, life or power, is because no one has agreed on what question is being asked in the first place. We would argue that the question has no meaning if it does not refer to the mana in ourselves. Mana, otherwise, is an energy of the heavens, a force of nature beyond us. What is the point of deliberating on mana in this form? The question then obviously refers to mana in relation to ourselves, humans. And in this case, it can only refer to a single thing: power. Silence fell. It was a well-thought-out answer, short and succinct, and seemed to leave no room for rebuttal. It cut to the core of the question and made many second-guess themselves. The answer Soraya gave was excellent, but why did Theron's feel like it was on another level? It was like Theron had taken a highly complex issue and distilled it down to its barest parts, and his opening statement became something that couldn't be ignored. Somehow, the battle felt over from the moment it began. Theron was right. What was the point in arguing about such an abstract concept of mana when they were just students? Even if they had dreams of grandeur, shouldn't they start by understanding mana in its simpler form? That was how their academy's curriculum was built. Often, teachers would tell lies to dumb subjects down, only to reveal the truths later on. What was even more potent was Theron's closing statement. He spent the entire time arguing that the definition of power was the simpler one and the only one they should acknowledge, until he flipped it on its head, forcing Soraya and Benedict to scrap their original closing statement. We have spoken a lot today about the importance of power as a defining characteristic of mana, but our position shouldn't be mistaken as power being the inferior definition, only useful to us all. Ultimately, power is more profound than it is given credit for. It's the most basic law of survival, the foundation of evolution and life itself. The reason it is so profound is because it is so simple. An ant does not need to understand life or even power, but it does know that it must survive, it must gather food, it must have the strength to protect itself and pass on its lineage so that its children may thrive in the coming generations. Power is the simplest and most profound truth of the world. It doesn't need to be debated upon, it just is. From the most insignificant creature to the mightiest warrior, it rules their life. If you want to one day philosophize over the meaning of life and its relation to mana, wait until you can look down on the heavens themselves. And even then, you'll only be able to because you had the power to do so. Theron, you were amazing. Sadie's little head bobbed up and down. Her eyes lit up like lanterns as she grabbed onto Theron's sleeve, waving it about. The reply was the same gentle smile. Sadie reminded Theron a lot of his little sister, so lively and full of joy. The little girl didn't realize how much trouble Theron had gotten himself into today, and it was probably for the best that she didn't know. That's right, I almost forgot. Sadie pressed a palm against her forehead. Big Sis Thessa wanted me to invite you to have food with us because we let out early today. Yes, yes, Flora is coming too. Flora and Sadie were usually attached at the hip, though Flora was the much quieter of the two. It was almost comical how opposing the two were. Sadie had red hair, Flora had black. Sadie was lively, and Flora was practically a mute. Sadie had a twin pair of pigtails, and Flora had just one ponytail. Theron made it his business to learn as much about the people around him as he could, but he didn't know much about Sadie. What was interesting was what she had said about her relation to Thessa, though. Maybe he would learn more about that today. Okay, I'll go with you. Really? Sadie's eyes went wide. Theron almost always said no, save for a few times. This was unexpected. Theron smiled. Let's go. The trio headed toward the exit, Theron seemingly oblivious to the number of eyes on him. Theron, Teacher Fern's voice called out, but Theron had already turned to her and gave her a polite bow. Apologies, Teacher Fern. I have an engagement with Sadie and Flora that's a bit time-sensitive. Maybe another day. Teacher Fern was a bit stunned, but she didn't get the chance to say anything else. Between the sea of students trying to exit and Theron's swift departure, there wasn't another chance at all. Where is he? Dean Gray looked up from his desk to find Teacher Fern standing without the student he had asked to see. Exhaling, Teacher Fern shook her head. I will take full responsibility for this, Dean. I'll have him come by and see you tomorrow. Dean Gray wasn't sure what to think at first, but seeing the conflicting emotions on this usually valiant housewife, he made some guesses. Teacher Fern's personality was well known. It wasn't the first time she had bumped heads with a student, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. What happened this time? Nothing happened. Teacher Fern said defensively. The dean didn't reply, sitting back in his chair and waiting. Teacher Fern had no choice but to give in the cliff notes. Though prepared, the truth still surprised him. It felt mostly benign. Was Teacher Fern thinking too much? Or did this child really have somewhere he urgently needed to be? Instead of concluding, he reached for a file drawer in his desk and quickly found Theron's. There weren't many students enrolled at the Imperial Academy at any given time. Having a file on them all wasn't an issue. Theron Gale Thunder, peculiar last name, only 14 years old, just recently turned. He passed the exam at 13, his family. The dean frowned, and his expression became more solemn. After a while, he tossed the file onto his desk, allowing it to slide toward Teacher Fern. Read it. She did as she was told. Soon, her face was flickering with shock and horror as well. An entire city? Who would do such a thing? Calm down and think about the meaning. You took a boy that doesn't want to be in the spotlight and thrust him into it. He had a perfect score in his Imperial exam. Do you know what that means? How could she not? The Imperial exam didn't separate the streams. Getting just 20% right was already considered very good. Getting a perfect score meant that you could already finish the first 5 basic classes of both the military and political streams with an S grade. That put you just 3 credits from graduating, 3 credits that Theron had just earned. If his goal was to be in the spotlight, he would have long since been. This is a silly complaint. How is he going to succeed in the future if he can't handle the spotlight? It's best we get him used to it now. The dean gave Teacher Fern a level glance, and she seemed to only now realize that she was talking to an expert far beyond her. Can you not see something a child can? The academy is perfectly safe, she defended. Is it? Yes. The dean shook his head. This woman was too stubborn. Not every child needs to have their hand held, Teacher Fern. Micromanaging their every step will only stifle them, and in this case, it will lose you the right to mold them at all. This child lost his family and friends in a single tragic accident. Do you think that lightning can strike that many times in one location? Can it even do so twice, let alone thousands of times? You've seen how smart this child is. Do you think that he cannot see this? All he knows is that someone powerful is the reason he is now an orphan, and the Empire and its nobles have done nothing about it. And this is the child you want to trust the system? This was the first time that the dean had heard of this incident, and that was a problem that weighed heavily on his chest as well. With his standing in the Empire, how could he be out of the loop? Even the details in the report were so vague he could only draw loose, overarching conclusions. But unlike them, Theron had been there. No obfuscation was going to make him forget. And for what the dean had heard in today's exchange, he was smart enough to draw even sharper conclusions. Teacher Fern was at a loss for words as Dean Gray stood to his feet. Dean Vermouth has been replaced by a thistle. The words seemed to have nothing to do with his first tirade, but they were still enough to make Teacher Fern react as though she had been struck by lightning. That's impossible. The imperial court would never allow a marquis to have such power in government and in the academy. Thistlebrook was the marquis of the Thistle clan. For them to control both the city and the academy was too much. The Nightingale imperial family had never allowed such a thing before. The dean gave her a look that said it had already happened. You look at the world from a privileged lens, and you've gotten used to it. Not every student here is of great and noble birth. The more you act like they are, the less equal they become. You've brought a lot of trouble to the doorstep of this child. I would suggest you keep that in mind and proceed as such. Teacher Fern fell into silence. The Purple Scale Tea House was often frequented by the young nobles of Thistlebrook. It could be said that it was popular even across the empire. The waitresses were beautiful, the food was of the highest quality, and the tea, especially, was well known for its positive effects on cultivation. Theron had never been before. If not for his curiosity about the mission Thessa, Soren, and Tegan were on, he would have never come. It was impossible to enter this establishment and not spend several thousand bronzes, and that was if you were being frugal. The top floors certainly had customers spending exorbitant amounts of silver. Luckily, the group gathered together on the first floor. Soren was already waving around a leg of meat and telling a tale about how he valiantly defeated a fiend beast. And then I slid under its enormous body and ran my blade down its gut. You should have seen it. Blood and intestines were flying everywhere. I thought I was going to drown down there. Thessa rolled her eyes. Oh yeah? You cut the belly of a gray rhino that easily. Soren flexed his free arm. Haven't you seen these muscles? Are you doubting my prowess? Theron smiled, sipping at his tea. A warmth spread through him that made the obscene price tag worthwhile. His cultivation had stabilized at the fourth resonance, but it was showing signs of increasing already. The process was also gentle and soothing, nothing like the pain he had endured consuming those mid-tier pills. Thessa waved a hand, having had enough of Soren's antics. We have a real hero here, but you're taking up the airspace with your nonsense. Sadie told me that you won 3 credits in an exchange today, Theron. How'd you manage it? Tegan looked over with a hint of surprise in his eyes as well, though Soren looked lost. They just happened to bring up a topic I was familiar with. I don't think I did anything special. Don't listen to him. Sadie chimed in. You should have seen the teachers' faces. They were practically latching onto his every word, just like the students. Teacher Fern was so confident in Theron that she chose him over all the seniors. Theron gave everyone a bitter smile, handing Sadie a handkerchief to wipe her mouth with. Before the little girl could be embarrassed, a snort came. The group was in a booth, not a private room. Anyone could overhear their conversation. It was just that Sadie wasn't expecting one of them to be Sawyer Thistle. Sawyer was still brooding over the missed opportunity and had come here to relax. He didn't expect that he would run into the very thing he had been trying to avoid all the while. If Sadie had just been praising Theron, that was fine. But what were the odds of him walking by just as she mentioned the seniors? Sawyer was followed by 2 others, and to Theron's surprise, they too wore sect garbs. Since when did so many sect members frequent the city? Watch your mouth, brat, Sawyer snarled. The happy atmosphere deflated like a balloon. Hey, Tegan pulled Soren back before his mouth got him into trouble. Soren wasn't one to pay attention to details, but Tegan and Thessa both had already noticed that while the Academy's insignia was on Sawyer's right hip, on his left there was the emblem of the Thistle Marquisate. It was a hint of green and brown that stood in stark contrast to the white and violet. The image of a vine of thorns restraining a heart was as clear as day. Branch bloodline or not, the influence the Thistle clan had in their marquise was too high. Sadie shrank back, hiding behind Thessa's shoulder. Sawyer snorted again, about to walk away when he caught a glimpse of Theron. There was something about the young boy's calmness that truly pissed him off. He flicked a finger, and a brownish energy cracked against Theron's cup, sending the expensive tea flying everywhere. The green-tinted liquid dripped down onto Theron's lap, soaking his robes through. He looked down at himself, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he closed his eyes. A familiar cycle of remembrance ran through his mind. He focused his intention and will, soothing himself. Seeing that he wasn't going to get another reaction, Sawyer finally swaggered off. Most wouldn't dare to attack at all in the tea house, but most weren't Thistles. "Are you all right, Theron?" Thessa asked with concern. "I'm sorry that happened." Theron opened his eyes and smiled. "No, it's fine. Not a big deal." His mana circulated, and the tea that soaked his lap was pulled up, streaming into his mouth. It was a nice party trick that lightened the mood, but Thessa's eyes couldn't help but light up. "Your cultivation is low, but your mana control is so impressive." "It's the best path for me," Theron explained. "Watermancers aren't very powerful in combat, so I've always focused on other things." Thessa nodded. "I try to tell this one all the time." She pinched at Sadie's cheeks. "Power isn't everything. Maybe she'll take it better hearing it from you." "Blah," Soren scoffed. "If it's not related to power, it's boring. I can't believe this. Days and no action at all. I'd rather return to the sect." "I'm sorry, Theron, but I think I'd rather die than be a Watermancer. How would I have defeated the Gray Rhino otherwise?" "Days and no action?" Theron probed instead of refuting. "Yeah, we told you we were on this super annoying mission, right? But it doesn't feel like that at all. We're just lounging around all day." "I did think that was a bit weird." Theron nodded. "I thought that sect disciples couldn't leave." This was common knowledge, so Theron wasn't afraid to mention it. In fact, doing so would help him steer the conversation a bit better. "Normally that's true," Soren confirmed. "But this time there were a bunch of weird missions the sect handed out. We're not even the only ones." "Weird missions?" Theron smiled. "Like saving cats from trees?" Thessa laughed. "The mighty Rhino Slayer reduced to catching house pets. Now, that would be a grand tale." Soren seemed to realize that Theron was making fun of him, and he looked at the young boy in shock. "No way. You're not allowed to make fun of me too, Theron. I thought we were on the same side. Am I safe from no one?" "You're an easy target," Sadie chimed in, finally recovering from the earlier conflict. "Oh gods, even the little girl is getting involved. Save me some face, will you? We aren't saving cats from trees, damn it. This is real, official business." The conversation continued, and Theron didn't manage to steer it back toward the topic of missions. That said, he still had come up with a faint inkling now. If he was correct, the mission itself wasn't important at all. Rather, for some reason, the sect wanted a large number of its disciples stationed in the city for the time being. The real question was, why? Theron pressed his hand against a familiar dirty mirror. With a flash, he appeared within a room of stone. It looked no different from the way he had left it. However, he hadn't come here for this. He left his room, walking down the long corridors to the common area. "I would like to take a look at any newly available missions, please," Theron spoke in his gentle voice to the man behind the counter. The old man gave Theron an additional look, surprised to see him back so soon. Now that he thought about it, Theron wasn't particularly injured after returning, which didn't make much sense. Of course, he didn't know that Theron spent much of his newly acquired funds on healing himself. If he came back with the wound Merchant Greycoat had left on his back, he would never hear the end of it from Teacher Fern, not to mention potentially exposing himself. The old man nodded and pulled out a jade, sliding it forward. He had seen youths like Theron before, workaholics that insisted on grinding themselves to an early grave. It wasn't his place to say much. This time, though, he had misunderstood Theron. Originally, the young Watermancer hadn't had any intention of returning for at least 2 months, but the oddities surrounding the sect had caught his attention. If he was correct, there might already be new missions related to this matter. The last time Theron had checked the missions was before he left Thistlebrook to kill Merchant Greycoat. As expected, he found something that caught his eye quickly. 3-star bronze mission, kill Yonaway Thistle. Reward, 22,000 bronzes. With the title, there was a flash of an image and a brief description of the target's cultivation. This Yonaway was in the 8th resonance. His cultivation might as well have been the last thing Theron cared about. The first thing that jumped out was his last name. It wasn't that the daggers of the night never targeted nobles, but it was very rare. The second was the reward. It was surprisingly low considering the risk. The only explanation was that there was a good opportunity in the near future that lowered the difficulty. The reward was set based on a coordination between the client and the association. If the client was doing some of the legwork as well, then the price could be negotiated down. Well, this was just speculation on Theron's part from observing the descriptions of thousands of missions in his short tenure. The third was probably the most shocking even still, and that was the fact he recognized this person. Theron's memory was excellent, and he forced himself to have an attention to detail most wouldn't. He knew that he was walking a fine line of life and death just by being associated with this assassin's guild, so he had no other choice. For exactly that reason, he was certain that this Yonaway was one of the two who entered the tea house with Sawyer earlier today. Theron forced himself to look around for longer, checking through the other missions one by one. "I will take this mission," Theron spoke as he pulled back his perception. The Yonaway mission had been toggled to the top of the memory jade, so the old man knew exactly which one he was referring to. Not saying much, the old man pulled the memory jade back and slid Theron a new one. "Your badge." Theron complied and handed his identification over. Missions couldn't be accepted casually. There were penalties for failing, and in the most egregious cases, there was a death penalty. This latter case would only happen if you failed 3 missions in a row, though. 3-star bronze mission, kill Yonaway Thistle. Reward, 22,000 bronzes. Details. The target is in the 8th resonance, specializing in woodmancy. His strongest abilities are his restraint skill, Thorny Fields, and his defensive skill, Thistled Bark. The weakness of the latter is that it restricts movement speed a great deal, which is why it is such a good pairing with Thorny Fields. If you can find a way to limit or eliminate Thorny Fields entirely, using a speed advantage to win should not be a problem. Firemancers are the best option. The intricacies of Thistled Bark allow it to. Thorny Fields is... The target will be inebriated every Friday evening at the Purple Scale Tea House of Thistlebrook City for the next month. These nights will be the best times to act. The wave of information came in torrents, but once again, it wasn't the information itself that shocked Theron so much. This detailed breakdown of Thorny Fields and Thistled Bark. Was there anyone but another Thistle who could give such detailed information? This is why I joined this association. In the Empire, the best information network on the surface was Nightingale Pavilion. Not only did they sell treasures and techniques, but they were a strong information center as well. But how could the Nightingale Pavilion ever provide any information that would be detrimental to the nobles and the Imperial clan? Daggers in the Night was different. Over the years, how many tidbits of information exactly like this had the association accumulated? If on the surface Nightingale Pavilion was the best information network, then in the dark, it was this very Assassin's Guild. Even with all this information, it still ranked as a 3-star. 3-star missions were the highest rank per given level. The Merchant Greycoat mission was a 4-star difficulty, but this was because of the number of times it had failed. This 4th star was reserved for missions that had been taken up and failed at least 10 times. For a new mission, 3-star was the absolute highest. Now that Theron had the information he wanted, though, he had no intention of completing the mission. The risk was too high. What he had really wanted was the chance to see the information on the other side. That, and now, he had an extra piece to the puzzle. The sect had suddenly sent so many disciples here, and now one of them was a target for assassination. There was definitely a storm brewing. Theron walked back to the academy with large strides the following morning, his thoughts churning. After killing Merchant Greycoat, he had left in a hurry. Had he known that there was such a conspiracy behind the consecutive failures that preceded him, he would have definitely been more thorough. Now, before he had even dealt with this problem, Teacher Fern had thrust another into his lap with her impulsiveness. And beneath all of that, there seemed to be yet another storm brewing related to the sect. Yanaway's mission was the only one he had gotten the full details of, but there were several other eyebrow-raising missions in the recent selections. The real question was, how could he best take advantage of this? There was always opportunity in chaos, and Theron's top priority was raising his cultivation realm as quickly as possible. But there seemed to be enough danger to put him in the eye of a storm he might want to get out of. The fact the association was so quiet about Merchant Greycoat's death, even though this would supposedly bring trouble to him, was the more concerning. Theron's steps came to a sudden stop. He looked up to find Sawyer blocking his path, and he couldn't help but frown inwardly. Was this Thistle really so insistent on continuing to bother him? Was this bullying? These sorts of childish games were the kind Theron had no time for. In fact, he was beginning to resent Sawyer for being so carefree. He took a breath, tuning out what Sawyer was likely saying and recalling the same reminders again and again. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Sawyer's voice cut through with a wave of mana that forced Theron out of his trance. The young man was already close to silvermancy. Comparatively speaking, Theron was far too weak before him. A hand reached out and grabbed Theron's collar. The forcefulness made Theron's inner organs quake, the air being sapped from his lungs as he was almost lifted from his feet. Sawyer was much older, and thus much taller than Theron. However, they looked eye to eye right this moment, Theron's toes barely grazing the ground. It was rare for such a confrontation to happen in the Imperial Academy. The fact it was happening right at the gates only made it all the more eye-catching. You think you can just walk by without greeting your seniors? Who do you think you are? Theron's icy blue eyes met Sawyer's. At the moment, they were as tranquil as the calm surface of a lake. Despite the pain racking his body, what fury there might have been had long been buried. He could still remember the last look in each one of their eyes, imprinting themselves like droplets of rain soaking his soul. He was not living for himself, for his vanity, for his pride. He was living for a purpose much higher than that. When his goals were achieved, he could return and raise the Thistle clan to the ground if that was what he so desired. But right now, he had no desires. "How dare you?" A furious voice echoed like thunder. It rang like a bell, and one could almost see the phantom image of a rolling pin waving in the air. Teacher Fern stormed over, and the ground rumbled. "Unhand him. Now." Blood began to leak from Sawyer's ears. It was clear that as loud as her voice was, it was targeted and focused nonetheless. Sawyer released on instinct. As close as he was to silvermancy, he was no match for a true goldmancy cultivator. Theron landed steadily and took a step back. "Do you know how hallowed this ground is? Do you have no respect for your own face as a senior, bullying your own junior? Do you have no thought for the rules of this academy?" Sawyer shook, feeling one part disarmed, another fearful, and yet another humiliated. "Teacher, this. You dare to speak back to me? I'm stripping you of 3 credits. "What?" Sawyer's eyes practically bulged out of his sockets. Silence. The suppressive aura of a goldmancer pressed down on Sawyer, so fiercely he almost kneeled. If not for her last bit of rationality, Teacher Fern truly would have gone so far. 3 credits, and your rights to become an honors graduate have been stricken. You'll be under house arrest for the next week. Go! Sawyer's body trembled, and he clenched his fists. But unable to do anything, he could only walk away. He had never been close to graduating with honors to begin with. He was in his 3rd year, but he only had 25 credits that had just become 22. This was the largest blow by far. For one's 1st year, you had to accumulate 5 credits to stay on track. But for the subsequent years, the bare minimum was 7. 3 credits was almost half of what most would be able to accumulate in a year. The worst part was that even though Sawyer was well ahead of this pace, the speed of accumulating credits plummeted the more you gathered. The classes became harder, and the grading became stricter. Losing 3 credits suddenly only put his 3 credits ahead of the minimum 19 he would need to pass the 3rd year. And half the year was already finished. The loss of these 3 credits might not harm him for the 3rd year, but it might be the reason he failed the 4th year or maybe his 5th year. This is the Imperial Academy, Teacher Fern growled, scanning the students. This isn't your personal backyard, and it's a place where your own merits weigh the most heavily. You are the future of the Empire's government and military. If you act like this now, how will the people trust you with their lives in the future? Teacher Fern swept a glance over Theron that made his own flicker. He sensed several things in that gaze. Guilt was the main one, but there was a surprising hint of helplessness and resignation. The next day, Theron found out why. Teacher Fern was no longer teaching his class. Theron sat in class. He was silent, but then again, so was everyone else. In this place, no matter how unruly you were as a student, there was only one person allowed to speak. Which of these youths would willingly get on the bad side of a Goldmancer? Much less a thistle. The old man at the helm of the classroom looked as though he had a foot in the grave. His manner of speaking was mind-numbingly slow and labored, and unlike the vigorous Teacher Fern, he didn't use the board much at all, seemingly too weak to walk around as often as he would need to. Teacher Burn Thistle, he had introduced himself as. But ever since he had spoken those words, Theron had heard nothing else but blaring warning signs. He was in danger. While he hadn't been an assassin for long, Theron had always had a rigorous attention to detail. Teacher Fern was gone, only to be suddenly replaced by a thistle. He had already noticed that there were large movements within the Imperial Academy. Before, he wasn't sure why, but now, someone big has been replaced. For Teacher Fern to lose her job when she had long secured tenure requires someone with heavy influence. In all likelihood, one of the deans has been replaced. More accurately, one of the deans has been replaced with a thistle. The sects were moving, and now there was such a large change in the Imperial Academy of all places. On top of that, a bounty had been placed on the head of a thistle. Even the Imperial clan wouldn't lightly target a Marquise. And now, thanks to Teacher Fern, Theron had likely been thrust right into the middle of this spotlight. The sects sent their disciples, and now the thistles are in the Imperial Academy. Both are related to a high concentration of young talent. This matter must be related to something that only the youth can accomplish. A secret realm is the most likely scenario, but that answer feels too cheap. Something is off about it. Theron continued to stare at Teacher Burn Thistle. He looked no different from a studious student. If it really was a secret realm, why would the Thistles feel the need to take control of the Imperial Academy? Why not just keep the information close to their vests and act accordingly? This has to be something happening on a larger scale. A secret realm is too acute, likely something occurring over a long period as well. And also something so important that the Thistles are willing to directly offend the Imperial clan in order to carve out a chance for themselves. The moment he began his deductions, Theron knew that he wouldn't be able to reach a conclusive ending. He was too small a character, and while he had joined Daggers of the Night for the Information Network, he had yet to properly work his way up to make use of it. So he had no choice but to take a chance. 3-star bronze mission, kill Yanaway Thistle. Reward, 22,000 bronzes. Originally, he hadn't wanted to take this mission. The risk was too high. But now, there was no other choice. If he didn't take the initiative himself, he would be one of the first targeted in this new world order. Student Theron. Yes, Teacher Thistle. Theron replied without missing a single beat, his tone laced with the utmost respect. I am new, but I have heard of your great feats already. I believe the class would love to hear your perspective on this topic. What do you think? I believe that one's weapon of choice should be secondary to their Mancer path. Whether elemental, flux, spirit, or soul. Only by first grasping your strengths in each field can you make an appropriate assessment for yourself. Oh, Byrne continued to speak in a slow cadence. But of these 4 paths, only Fluxmancy seems to have any direct correlation with weapons. Are you saying that only Fluxmancers, masters of the body, should use weapons? No. Theron shook his head. I do not know much about spirit and soulmancy, but what I can say as a watermancer myself is that a great sword would not suit me very much. That being said, It might be an excellent weapon for an Earthmancer who tends to stay more stationary in combat and would better take advantage of a bulkier weapon. A fascinating perspective indeed, taking into account the kind of battle style most suited to your Mancy path and choosing your weapon. Would anyone else like to contribute their thoughts? A coincidence? Theron thought to himself. No, this man is a spirit mancer. He read the intentions of my mind and felt that I wasn't giving the lesson my full and undivided attention. There was a rage that threatened to build in Theron's chest. This was the first time since that day that he was running into a spirit mancer. His emotions, ones he usually controlled so well, showed signs of slipping from his grasp. But just like always, he slowly closed his eyes. The same thoughts and memories he always ran through came in one after another. I'm not living for myself. Those simple 5 words were his creed, and he would live by them. Theron opened his eyes to find a smiling pair looking right at him. He could practically see teacher Burn Thistle's amusement dancing in his green irises, his old features twisted by age and wrinkles. There was only a calm tranquility in Theron's own as the rest of the class seemed like a blur to him. When he stepped out, his strides long, his every step carried a rhythmic cadence that aligned his movements with his heart. It was a state he felt he could only enter when there was heavy rain, but today he felt filled with purpose. He was going to kill a thistle. Malaya stood on the corner of a cobblestone path, fidgeting with her dress. She wrung her small hands again and again, her anxiety practically spilling out of her like water from a spout. Her hand reached into her purse, pulling out a small handkerchief and dabbing at her nose and forehead. She never wore makeup, but today she had foolishly gone and tried it. Now she was worried about it smearing down her face. The weather wasn't particularly hot, and the sun was about to set, but might as well have been a sauna around her. She had never been asked out on a date before, much less by a young man 3 years younger than she was. She had said yes before she even understood what was happening, and now it was too late to escape. The thought of disappointing Theron filled her with even more anxiety than she was already drowning in. Did she like him? Was this love? Steam came out of her ears, the ridiculous spiral of thoughts almost making her pass out. A hand caught her as she stumbled back. Are you all right? Theron had appeared at some unknown time, a light smile on his face. Malaya opened her mouth to respond, but nothing but an odd squeak came out. All of a sudden, she wanted to find a place to bury her head, only barely managing to keep her wits about her for long enough to realize Theron's chest was not the place for that. With a push, Theron helped Malaya stabilize herself. He glossed over the odd sound she made as though he hadn't heard anything. I'm happy you came to accompany me tonight. Shall we go? He asked politely. Ah, yes. Right. Malaya looked toward the ground and nodded, tightly holding onto her purse with both hands. On the way to their destination, maybe because Theron was good enough at making idle chatter to distract her, Malaya managed to forget about her embarrassing display for a moment. It wasn't until they had entered the purple scale tea house and were arranged a place to sit that the gravity began to settle in once again. Theron asked for a menu as though it was only natural. Would you like me to order for you? Malaya didn't know what to say. Yes? But that seemed like a very... Wait, weren't they on a date? Was it natural then? No, but... Steam came from her ears. She was doing so well, but then this guy came and asked her such a loaded question. What was she even doing here? Her marriage wouldn't be up to her to decide anyway. Her father would probably kill her and Theron just for being here. And wasn't it a bit late for a date? The sun was already setting. No, it was set now. Was this what teenagers got up to? It couldn't be that Theron was expecting something else for tonight, right? What should she say if he invited her somewhere else? My apologies. It seems I overstepped. Here. Theron waved to a waitress after handing his menu over to Malaya. Can I have another menu, please? Malaya found her breathing returning to normal. The two of them ordered their food and tea, and soon Malaya found herself forgetting again. I have heard a lot about the Vermouth Earldom. One of our deans is a Vermouth, if I recall correctly, so I've always had quite some respect for them, Theron said with a smile. Ah, Malaya sighed. That's unfortunately not the case. My uncle had his position relieved by the crown. Oh, Theron's brows raised with surprise. Do you? I probably shouldn't ask that question, forgive me. It's not a big deal. My uncle was quite old, and it was about time a new face was given a chance to lead. Former Dean Vermouth was the head of the military department, but it's been a very long time since we've had any true elites of the military stream. There's been some unrest recently, and now isn't the time for a lull like this. There should probably be some pretty big changes in the coming days, mostly to the military stream. I see. Theron nodded slowly. Do you have any thoughts of doing both, Theron? Malaya took the initiative to ask a question. Theron was startled. Both? You already have 12 credits. Well, no, you actually have 15 now, right? As a first year. That's amazing. I've heard of geniuses like you before. There's one in Maine Academy who had 32 credits as a first year, 16 from the academic stream and 16 from the military stream. I actually think you can do it. It took a while for Theron to regain his calm. He didn't expect Malaya to have such a fiery side to her. Theron chuckled. I'm just a waterman, sir. The military stream probably isn't for me. Malaya seemed to realize she had gotten a bit excited. Indeed, it would be tough for a watermancer to make a name for themselves in the military stream. Is that a dream of yours? Theron asked. Well, I've thought about it, but I don't think I'm cut out for fighting either, Malaya said sheepishly. Haha, you must have a lot of faith in me. I appreciate the kind words of encouragement. Malaya blushed. About this, Theron, my marriage, you see, I'm not at liberty to, She had begun to speak before she could think, and now she found herself halfway through without a destination. She knew she had to say the words, but now the embarrassment was overwhelming her again. As she was stumbling over herself, there was a rustling at the door, a bell at the top of the frame, releasing a delicate chime as a group walked in. Usually, such a thing would be left to a shoddy establishment, but in the Purple Scale Tea House, it felt like their souls were being tickled. Sawyer and Yanaway Thistle had appeared.